Before you can learn how to actually dive a rebreather, I think it's time that we talk about what a rebreather is. How does it work? So,
Yeah,
what is it?
absolutely.
What's a rebreather?
Well, I have mine right here, and it's really very simple. And what's interesting about this particular part of the course applies to every rebreather you may look at, learn about, because they're all basically doing the same thing.
Right.
So let me explain what's going on here. A rebreather means you're rebreathing your same air over and over. What this device has to do for you, though, overall, is it has to take out the carbon dioxide that you exhale and replace back in the oxygen that you metabolize. Other than that, it's breathing in and out of a paper bag, but it removes the carbon dioxide and replaces the oxygen that you metabolize. Now, how does it work specifically? That's the big picture. So, you can see here we have a loop. You're going to hear that in rebreather world all the time. A loop. It's a closed circuit loop, which means when you exhale, your air goes back into the same closed circuit and doesn't go out into the water column like it would for open circuit. We put in our mouth the loop, and this is called a DSV, a diver supply valve. It's closed when it's in the position towards down, and then you pull it up towards your mouth. I can now breathe in and out of this loop. When I exhale, it goes to the right. There's a mushroom valve right here that only lets the air move to the right. Goes down this tube, and it goes straight into this right here, which is the sorb.
The scrubber, yeah.
The scrubber, the sorb. It removes the carbon dioxide. We're going to show you that. There's videos of how we pack it, how we assemble that. Then the exhaled air goes into these side storage containers, which are called counter lungs. So it's holding the air. It's simply holding the air, because what's going to happen is you're going to then breathe in, and it's going to come back out of the counter lungs, back into the sorb, back up this side, and enter into the DSV through another mushroom valve. One way. It can only move this way and go into your mouth. Now, you metabolized part of that oxygen, right? So what we're always doing on a rebreather is we have to monitor what is known as the partial pressure of our oxygen. So you're going to see we have one other thing. We have a dive computer, a petrol, shear water, connected to the rebreather. And I know it's probably hard to see from this video. We can show it up close later. It's reading through oxygen sensors the exact partial pressure of oxygen that you're breathing. That's all part of your dive planning as well. What partial pressure are you going to do this dive at? So when you breathe in, your body metabolizes some of that oxygen. That's the fuel of life. You exhale, typically right now in the open air, it's about 21% oxygen in the world. We metabolize about 5% of that, so we exhale back out. And if you kept doing that without adding back oxygen, you would dilute that down to potentially a hypoxic level where you could pass out. So very simple. We have right below here a little baby oxygen cylinder. There it is. This oxygen cylinder on our mechanical rebreather is constantly flowing in a little bit of oxygen at approximately a 0.7 liter per minute trickle back into the rebreather to replace the oxygen that you metabolize. And it's set to be at a level that is, for most people on a normal dive, that it's going to replace about the amount that most people metabolize.
Right. It all depends on your level of activity. If you're working hard, you're metabolizing more, so you're going to have to manually add. And if you're just sitting there, like drift diving, for example, in Cozumel, then you're not metabolizing as much because you're fully relaxed. So you may have to, control that a little bit, add some diluent to it because your PO2 is going to rise.
And he brought up a great point,
yeah.
Right? Add diluent. So look, there's two things that you may add. You're basically controlling your partial pressure. Now, right now, I have it at like 0.26. That just happens to be, I'm sitting here, I'm not doing anything. But most dives, we try to plan at about a 1.2 partial pressure.
Yeah.
We're going to get into what that means. Not at this moment. This is a big picture. But what I will tell you is if I have to add oxygen because my partial pressure dropped below where I want it to be, I have a little button right here. It's called a manual add valve. That's another thing you're going to have to learn about. Guess what? You push the button, it adds 100% oxygen, brings up your partial pressure. If I made my partial pressure too high, it's above the 1.2, and I want to bring it down, we add diluent.
Yeah.
Gus just mentioned it.
And those are the two gases that you will be working with when it comes to gases into a rebreather. And Woody's right. Every rebreather works this way. It relies on oxygen and diluent to dilute your PO2 or raise your PO2 by adding oxygen. So the mechanism in which the rebreather operates can change. Like some rebreathers, the gas direction goes left instead of right, so clockwise instead of counterclockwise or whatever. Like there's some changes and modifications like that. The placement of the counter lungs in our system, the counter lungs are placed right next to your actual lungs. In other rebreathers, counter lungs are pressed like at the shoulders, and I've seen them in all kinds of different positions. Again, every manufacturer has a vision of how the system should operate and pros and cons of each one of them. But the principle of you breathing into a paper bag, as Woody mentioned, and have that CO2 scrubbed and replaced with fresh O2 from a smaller tank is the same principle every rebreather uses. Now, I did want to add one thing here. If you look into rebreathers, there's two kinds. There's closed circuit rebreathers like the DiveTalk Go, and then there's semi-closed circuit rebreathers, which work a little bit differently. They don't have 100% O2. They only rely on one gas, which in most cases is nitrox, and they are essentially a gas extender. It's just feeding you nitrox, but it's going through your diluent as you're diving. With the Go, because it's a closed circuit rebreather, we only use our bailout gas, which happens to be our diluent gas at the same time, if you have an emergency, if you have to bail out. So in most cases, like when we take the Go to a meetup, for example, we can dive the whole week with a single tank. So we just have one aluminum 80 and we dive every day, twice, 3 times a day, and we never use it because you only use it for emergencies.
That's right. And guess what? This unit will mount to any recreational BC. You just clip it on. A couple clips up top, couple bottom clips on your BC, and you have your normal back mount 80 cubic foot cylinder, and you jump off the boat, and this is good for about 2.5 hours. The Sorb has a useful life. It can only clean the CO2 for a certain amount of time, and that depends upon the amount of sorb a particular unit holds.
And level of utilization and depth and temperature of the water. There's a lot of variables, but
that's right.
Yeah, ours is rated for 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours, which for me that
and the fitting
dives more than that.
The fitting of the unit is one of the skills that you will go through with your instructor when you do your hands-on portion, the practical portion of it, which will take place after this class. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and we talked about semi-closed versus closed circuit rebreathers, is there's also electronic rebreathers and mechanical rebreathers like the DiveTalk Go. And Woody mentioned this is a mechanical rebreather, so you will add oxygen or diluent depending on what you want to do, raise or lower your partial pressure. However, there are electronic rebreathers out there that are designed to automatically add one or the other based on what you need. Obviously, that increases complexity, so it's like pros and cons. You don't have to monitor it as closely and add yourself, but at the same time, that automation, that automatic system that will add one or the other can fail. Because we don't have that, it cannot fail, so it's safer from that perspective.
Sorry, I was just getting a little bit of oxygen therapy.
Exactly.
So I'm breathing 100% oxygen right now, and really, what I'm showing you is I'm adding O2, and my partial pressure is rising. Mm-hmm. So you can see we're basically making nitrox on the fly, breathing in and out of a paper bag just to wrap this all up. Inside of it, we have sorb that removes the carbon dioxide. On the bottom of this particular unit, we have oxygen that replaces the oxygen you metabolize. It's a closed circuit loop, so you're breathing the same gas over and over again. To Gus's point, you're probably going to use very, very little of your diluent gas. And that's the basic concept, guess what, of every single rebreather.